Hey everyone, welcome. I am so excited to be learning with you today. Have you ever just scratched your head at something your parents or grandparents said, or maybe they've looked totally confused by how fast you text on your phone? Well, if so, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're diving into a really interesting reading lesson about different generations. We're going to explore who they are, what makes them unique, and most importantly, how understanding these differences can actually bring us all a little closer together. All right, let's get into it. Let's start by thinking about your own family for a second. Have you ever noticed differences between you and your parents? Maybe you have completely different ideas about what kind of music is good or how much time you should really be spending on digital devices. You might even have different beliefs about what's most important in life. These differences in cultural values and traditional views often lead to what we call a generational conflict or a generation gap. And honestly, it is completely normal. But to really understand why this gap exists, we need to take a quick look at history.
Look at this timeline. A generation is basically just a group of people who were born and living during the same time period. So first up, we have Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. This is probably the generation of your parents. Next is Generation Y, born between the early 1980s and the late 1990s. And finally, we have Generation Z, born between the late 1990s and early 2010s. Take a quick look. Where do you fit on this chart, and where do your parents fit? Keeping this timeline in the back of your mind is going to help you so much as we go through our reading material today.
Okay, Section 2, important vocabulary to know so we can build your reading toolkit. Before we jump into reading about the specific traits of each age group, we need to make sure we've got our vocabulary down. We're going to look at 4 important English words from our text. Our first word is characteristic. I'll say it slowly. Characteristic. It's a noun. A characteristic is a typical feature or quality that something or somebody has. So, for example, being super friendly might be a characteristic of your best friend. Today, we're going to be looking for the common characteristics, the shared qualities of these different generations. Our second word is critical. Listen to that one. Critical. This one is an adjective. Now, in this context, being critical doesn't mean just pointing out mistakes or being mean. It actually means making careful judgments. A critical thinker is someone who doesn't just blindly believe everything they hear. Instead, they carefully analyze information before they accept it as true. Next up, we have creative. Listen closely. Creative. Another adjective. Being creative involves using your skills and your imagination to produce something totally new. If you like thinking outside the box, making art, or just finding fresh ways to solve everyday problems, well, you are a creative person. And our final vocabulary word today is platform, pronounced exactly how it looks, platform. This is a noun. It refers to the type of computer system or the software that is being used. Honestly, if you use social media apps, watch video sharing sites, or use digital learning tools every day, you are already an absolute expert at using different platforms.
All right, it's time to meet the generations and test your reading comprehension.
Great job on the vocabulary. Now let's put that new knowledge to the test. We're going to do a quick reading comprehension check based on our source text. I will give you a description, and I want you to guess which generation I am talking about. Ready? Here is your first question. Which generation is known for being critical thinkers who achieved higher levels of education than previous generations? Take a moment to think about it. Look back at that timeline in your mind. Is it X, Y, or Z? Let's check your answer. Did you guess Generation X? If so, great job. People born between 1965 and 1980 are known as critical thinkers. According to our text, this is largely because they achieved higher levels of education than the generations that came before them. All that formal education really trained them to make those careful judgments about the world. Okay, let's try the next one. Which generation is known for being really curious and ready to accept changes? Take a few seconds to think. Does it sound like the millennials or maybe the digital natives? Let's see. If you guessed Generation Y, you are absolutely right. Also widely known as millennials, this group, born between the early 1980s and the late 1990s, is super famous for their curiosity. Because they grew up while the world was rapidly globalizing, they are highly adaptable and very ready to accept changes in society. All right, here is our last one. Which generation grew up during a time of massive technological developments and uses apps and digital devices creatively? I'll give you a second, but I have a feeling this description is going to sound pretty familiar to most of the 10th grade students watching right now. And yes, let's check it. It is Generation Z. Born from the late 1990s to the early 2010s, this is very likely your generation. You grew up alongside some incredible technological developments. Because of this, using digital devices and platforms is basically second nature to you. And the text specifically highlights how highly creative you are with these tools.
Now, what's really fascinating is when we place Generation X and Generation Z side by side visually like this. Look at the contrast. Over on the left, we have Generation X, who rely heavily on critical thinking and traditional higher education. Then, over on the right, we have Generation Z, whose whole environment was shaped by rapid technological developments, making them incredibly creative with apps and digital platforms. When you see it laid out visually like this, it makes so much sense how a generation gap forms in a family, right? You are simply shaped by completely different historical environments.
Section 4. Reflection. Let's apply what you've learned today.
We've covered a lot of great facts and vocabulary from the text today, but the absolute best part of reading is taking what you've learned and applying it to your own life. I want you to think critically about what we just read. Do you agree with the descriptions of your generation in the text? Do you feel that being creative and comfortable with digital platforms truly matches your own personal characteristics? Remember, a critical thinker doesn't just accept everything they read, they evaluate it. So take a moment right now to reflect on whether you and your friends actually fit this description.
So here is the huge takeaway from our entire lesson today. Understanding our common characteristics and cultural values helps us bridge that generational conflict. When your parents from Generation X start asking a ton of tough questions, they aren't trying to annoy you. It's just because they are natural critical thinkers. And when you want to use an app to solve a problem, it's because you are a creative Generation Zer. Understanding these core differences helps us communicate with so much more empathy and respect.
I want to leave you with one final question to think about. How will you use your own critical and creative skills to bridge the generation gap in your family today? Maybe you could use your tech skills to teach your parents how to navigate a new digital platform. Or maybe you could ask them to share their critical thoughts on a big decision you're making. Thank you so much for participating in this explainer. You all did fantastic work today, and I will see you next time.